afternoon.
Doing great, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It is time to record the 30th installment of our Kitchen Table Finance blog.
All right, I like it.
Blog. See, I still want to call it a blog when it's a podcast. I'll get this stuff right one of these days.
That's right. Get with the times.
Practice. And so today is kind of more of a real kitchen table kind of finance discussion. We're gonna just have a conversation around something that comes up fairly often in client conversations, and that's helping, like how to help adult children in certain situations.
Yeah, so this might be a kitchen table and maybe a couple of adult beverage conversation.
Right. We'll stick with coffee for today.
Yeah. But you're right. It definitely is something that comes up a lot of times when we're dealing with folks and doing financial planning of, my adult kid needs some help. What do I do?
Yeah.
Can I do it? Should I do it?
Yeah. And there's layers to that. There's the first question, more of the objective question is, can I afford to do what I need to do? And then there's the, should I do what I feel like I should do?
Right.
To help, what they're asking me to do. Sometimes you may not feel you even have a choice depending on what that help entails. So it can be an interesting conversation and one that doesn't always have great answers.
Yeah, like most things financial, right? If it was just about your financial success, we'd have an easy mathematical answer
Right.
as to whether or not it would be a good investment. Unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. And so
Right.
there's some give and take there. So what I'd like to do, Dave, is switch it up a little bit and propose a new section of the podcast being, would you do it? And go over a couple of these different scenarios, and we can kind of see what your take and my take is on some of these different things as to how we would answer some of these questions.
Yeah.
So the first one up to bat in terms of helping adult children is home purchases.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. It can take a couple forms, either helping with a down payment, or I've had a couple situations where parents were asked to co-sign on loans.
Yes.
Yeah. And so would you do it, Nick?
That's a good question. So I guess for me, I wouldn't shy away from doing a help on a down payment. I certainly would not feel comfortable co-signing, because if you're a co-signer, typically that means that whoever you're co-signing for can't afford the house or doesn't have the credit to do it on their own. And so that's typically, in my opinion, not a great idea, even for a child. But a down payment, I could definitely see that as a kind of a stepping stone to help them, provided that I was comfortable with the house and the terms of the loan and where they stood. I could definitely see myself doing some help on a down payment.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that, because we end up saying to clients or in prospective clients quite often when they're asking about mortgage questions, if you find you're trying to get around the rules and the requirements, it's usually a signal you maybe shouldn't be making that home purchase. Maybe you're going a little too far. And so, those rules are there to protect the bank, but they're also there to keep you from getting in over your head. And if what we're doing by helping our kids is helping them take a step they maybe shouldn't, then that's one thing. But if it's a matter of helping them come up with a down payment that maybe, if they're on the right track and the right trajectory to be able to own a home, but, the opportunity's there now, but maybe not all of the savings. Yeah, that's something I can get behind.
Yeah, especially, when you start talking about down payment, you can end up saving a bunch of money by having a decent down payment under basically the same terms of loan.
Right.
But, when it comes to home purchase, the home mortgage industry bends over backwards, as does the government, to get you qualified. So if you can't qualify on your own, you really have to take a step back and consider what's going on and why.
Yeah. And another one that comes up pretty often is job changes. When somebody's young and maybe a couple of years out of school, first career path isn't exactly working out. Maybe there's not that contingency fund in place for them to bridge a gap if they're making a move. do you do there?
So me personally, I would lean towards helping on this one, and I'd probably be more favorable in helping in something along these lines than I would on a down payment in a house. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I say that is I'm a firm believer in you have to do what you, as far as work, you have to do what you're passionate about. And a lot of times that means taking a pay cut or doing something differently or taking on some risks. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, there's a lot more value in doing that. And what traditionally happens is you end up making more money over your career by doing what you're passionate about than being stuck in a job that you don't love, but maybe pays
Mm-hmm.
more. So
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely be more inclined to help in that regard. That's a value of mine, a family value, even if it maybe doesn't make the most financial sense from a stability and income standpoint to take a pay cut to do something that you're passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. I pretty much agree with that, but I would want to I'd want to talk about what the long-term plan is, and I'd want to feel good that there was, the right solution in the works,
Mhm.
and it wasn't just part of a pattern. Because with all these things, you've also got to be careful about perpetuating behavior that maybe a few hard knocks might help straighten out.
Yeah, I think
So
that's a great point because, there's a difference between changing careers because you're passion and changing careers because you don't know what you want to do or you don't like your boss or you want to try something new for the fifth or sixth time.
right, right. And
So,
I've had that kind of tough conversation with some clients too, where kids were asking for something, and at first it seemed good from my point of view, and then as we got deeper into the conversation, this wasn't the first time this had been asked,
yeah,
and
sure.
so that kind of flavored the conversation from there on out. You
Well, and I
know,
think you get into that conversation of are you helping by helping, or sometimes are you hurting by helping?
right,
Are
right,
you, prolongating some difficult things and soul searching that a kid needs to
right,
do?
right, and taking that a step further, the next item on your list is legal difficulties.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
oh man, that is tough. That is a
Yeah.
tough one.
You have mixed feelings about this one. For the most part, I feel like pretty hands off. If I were to do something, it would definitely be more in the lines of maybe a loan than necessarily hey,
Right.
I'll pay for your lawyer because you got in trouble with the law. But and maybe this is because I watch too much Dateline. But man,
Right.
I would have a tough time if I thought my child was innocent of a major crime and not stepping in to help. I would have a tough time with
Right.
that.
Right. And there's just no good answers. I think I would do what I felt I had to do in that situation, but boy, again, tread cautiously, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And you know, health issues is another one that comes up, and we've
Mhm.
seen we've seen that with clients as well. And when somebody through no fault of their own is put in a bad financial situation like that, it's pretty tough to not be there to help them. And I think at that point, the guest room's available, and we'll do what we need to do.
Yeah, this one for me is the toughest of all in terms of, sacrificing my financial future for keeping my kid healthy. I don't know that I could ever. Yeah, there's just no good answer around that. I think of that movie with Denzel Washington where he went through all that craziness to
Hmm.
get his kid that surgery. And, I think the reason that movie was so successful is because people could empathize with him in terms
Right,
of, if your kid's sick, you're going to do whatever you can to keep them
right,
healthy. But,
right,
the flip side of that is how much is too much? How much do you spend on keeping your own kid healthy between keeping yourself healthy and your family healthy and being able to do
right.
those things? That's a tough conversation, a tough
Yeah,
balance
yeah.
for sure.
Well, and with all these things, there's that it's fine to say you would do these things, but affordability is another question, and we'll circle back to that. But
Yeah.
now the next one you've got on your list, with living at home or moving back home, I'm more inclined to the tough love approach when it comes to that,
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I guess this feeds back into the job change idea too, I'm all for finding that thing you're passionate about and that you want to make your forever career. But sometimes you got to wash some dishes and um, rake
Sure.
some yards or something in the meantime to bide your time while you're figuring that out. And sometimes you got to have a job you hate for a little while, and so you find the one that you
Absolutely.
love. So,
Yeah.
if my kids are listening, the refrigerator door will remain
There,
unlocked, but
there you have
but
it.
but we better have a plan in place. So,
Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I probably lean more towards your logic when it comes to this, but I know for a fact that my wife doesn't, and so I'm not sure
mhm.
that I have a fight to make in this one because
Yeah,
we've talked about, our house and what happens when our kids move out and if we need this big of a house. And,
yeah,
that conversation's very short because she wants to have a house that the kids can always come back to,
mhm.
and I wouldn't doubt for a second if they called mom and asked to move back in, she would probably drive out there and pick them up and bring them
Yeah.
home. So,
So,
there's two sides to that story. I know it's important to her and it's a value of ours to always have that open door policy, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to help the kids either.
yeah. Well, it's a team sport, right?
Absolutely. You got to pick battles.
So, you got adoption on the list next. That's an interesting one because that has cross-generational implications in a way, like value that's maybe a little different. It's one thing to say, well, I value the idea of my child being able to afford a house. It's a little bigger, deeper question when it's I want to help my child start their own family.
Sure. Yeah.
So, um, and that can be a very expensive proposition.
Yeah, and I didn't put it on here, but you could also, I know there's therapy and different things to
Yeah,
get pregnant on your own too. So I do have clients that have gone
I
through
have
whether it
too.
was adoption or in helping kids out. And so for me, this one comes down to a lot, my personal thing is, and this is probably selfish more than anything, I'd be much more willing to invest and spend money on that because I want to be a grandparent someday.
Right. I guess that's what I was getting at. It has a bigger dimension to it than just
Yeah.
a financial value. So yeah, that's not one I'd ever even pondered for myself before today. And uh, knock on wood, hopefully won't have to worry about it. But I can see that being a pretty deep conversation if it were to come up. I
Yeah.
don't. I'm going to punt as to what I would do for right now. I'd
Okay.
probably try to find a way to help. Um, and then the last one on our list, but I think at this point you can extrapolate a lot of different ideas from these things is divorce. And boy, that could, especially if it's a messy situation where somebody needs that support.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, this one
yeah,
comes up quite frequently as well, unfortunately, where we have situations
yeah,
like that kids need help and
yeah,
need to get through certain periods of time. And
yeah,
that's a tough
yeah.
one. And a lot of it will probably lean back to your values and how you believe in divorce to begin with. Um,
Hmm.
but, again, it's one of those, especially when you start talking about kids involved and things like that, that's difficult. So if you got to punt on the last one, I'm going to punt on this one. How's that?
Yeah, well, I think this is one where I would say, the Velvet Museum rope might come off the bedroom for a little while, so they could have,
Yeah, sure.
some space and some time.
Yeah.
I don't know what the financial commitment would be, but you know, I think the main thing with all of these, it's pretty obvious it's not just a dollar and cents objective decision, right? All these things hit at the heartstrings, all the difficult conversations nobody likes to talk about money in families, or very few people do.
Mhm.
And you know, all of these kind of get to the heart of the matter pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's go into some of the specifics of, obviously we kind of ran down these, but I'd like to talk a little bit about how you can make these decisions and what things to
Yeah.
consider when you're making them.
Yeah.
Obviously the hard part is figuring out whether or not you would do it and talking and
Right.
doing that. But I think the next issue is it affordable and how does it affect your financial
Right,
future?
right, and that's something where we can help as financial
Mhm.
planners. Of course, we can facilitate those conversations and help you figure out where your heart's at on these things. But in terms of looking at, okay, if I need to spend X to help Junior with a situation, what's that mean for my long-term planning? Well, most of our clients have seen we've got the tools to visually work those things out and
Sure.
see what the impacts will be. And also taking it a step further, there's always the strategy level of can we do this? And then there's the tactical level of, okay, if we're going to do it, what's the best way to do it?
Right.
And a lot of people, we find, regardless of what the expense is, but I think with these more emotional kind of expenses, it can be worse, where people will compartmentalize how they think about their money. Oh, I've got money in this account, and that's money I should use for that.
Mm.
And when we look at it as financial planners, we're like, well, no, the tax implications or there's something else that you need to consider and think big picture, about how this is going to play out. And, what we can do is come in and mitigate the cost and mitigate the risk.
Yeah.
And,
For sure. And I think that's one of those, just like any goal that you have, if we put it in there and figure out how does it affect your plan. So if you're planning on retiring at 65, but decide you want to help your kids buy a house, does that mean you have to wait until 67? And,
Yeah.
what are the financial ramifications of that decision? Because
Right.
figuring those things out will help you make those decisions
Right.
and will help you, follow follow the trend of, is it more important to help my kid buy a house or retire at 65? And
Right.
then we're making a decision based on what our values are, not
Yeah.
necessarily what the best financial decision
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And the implications of a one-off expense a lot of times are not as bad to the big picture as people might assume.
Sure.
So don't just conclude you can't afford it. If you're serious about doing it, talk to us and
Yeah.
we'll help you make that determination. The other thing that comes to mind, I know we're both big believers in planning being flexible and being a
Mm.
process.
Mm.
And if you make a plan this year, you've got to expect things are going to come up, and we should be building in. We may not know that 2 years from now your daughter's going to have a situation that we need to come up with some extra money, but we know something's going to come up.
Right.
Something's going to be different than what we planned. So
Yeah.
don't make rigid plans. Make plans that can adapt and plans that have flexibility. And look, when we talk about flexibility and planning, we're talking about the ability to get money back from certain things and to have money that doesn't have strings attached.
Right. To be able to change course. And to be
Right.
honest, if things didn't come up, you would only need to see us once in your lifetime.
Right.
Because we
Right.
just
And life would
plan
be pretty
everything out to the
boring.
T and
Right.
you'd be fine.
Right. Right. Right.
Unfortunately, we meet with our clients regularly, mostly
Yeah.
because things come up and things
Yeah.
change. We have to be
Yeah.
ready for that.
Chaos is job security.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah.
So, and I think the next part of this would be, is it wise? So just because it's
Right.
affordable and just because you can do the one-time thing, is it going to help your kid be a better human, have a
Mhm.
better, put them in a better situation? Or is it going to be something that if you do this now, you're probably going to have to continue doing things in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years? And, the example would be the home purchase. If you're co-signing on a mortgage and they get behind or can't really truly afford it, then that's going to be more of an ongoing thing.
Right.
Saying, hey, I'll give you $5,000 for a down payment to help you get better loan terms.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always use the Thanksgiving table example. Is this going to be an issue? Is Thanksgiving dinner going forward from now on going to be just weird because of this decision?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, Are you going to be able to sit at the same table with the whole family and feel
Right.
good the way, you know? So,
Absolutely. I like that.
so yeah, it's and you know we can help talk about that, but at the end of the day, that's kind of an individual value decision.
Sure.
Um, and you know, one thing I have told with a couple of clients. Well, first, I guess I would preface this by saying, you know, most times when these things come up, the client's already decided
Mm.
what they want to do,
Sure. Yep.
either helping or not helping. And they're looking to us either to make sure it's affordable and not just a complete mistake, or to find the best way to do it. Or, and I've told people a couple times, I make a good bad guy,
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know. And
Hmm.
that came up recently with some clients. It was like you go back and you just tell them that your financial planner said there's no way that's a good idea.
Yeah.
and you know, was it as in that particular situation, it wasn't that big of a deal. They would have been okay. It wasn't a good idea, but they didn't want to do it.
Right.
And so, you know, go back and tell them Dave said that's puts your plans at jeopardy, and he really doesn't think that that's a position they want to put you in. And
Yeah, that's a great point to have that kind of a system in place and to have clients, use us as kind of the scapegoat of the bad guy. And we do
yeah,
that
yeah.
for kids. And one of the things that we do, with widows a lot of times who get into a similar situation where they've got people asking them for all kinds of stuff is just to
Hmm.
say hey, that's a great idea. I'll talk to my financial planner about it. We'll
Yeah,
see what
yeah,
comes up.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And be prepared to have those and that's a
Yeah.
great one to tell a kid if they come to something with you and you're not sure about, or you are sure about it, but you don't want to say no off the
Hmm.
bat. Tell them you need to talk to your financial planner and see how it's going to affect
Yeah,
you, and go
yeah,
back and say, my financial planner doesn't believe that this is going to be good for us long
right,
term.
right.
I think that's a
And
great point.
um, another thing that comes up along these lines in these conversations quite often is the idea of fairness
Yes.
when there's other siblings involved. In you know, that's another very subjective conversation. I've seen parents just kind of keep a ledger. You
Sure.
know, I've seen others who actually built it into estate planning where I gave Johnny, you know, X% of his inheritance already, you know, for these reasons. And so we've adjusted percentages accordingly.
Yeah, I think that one is definitely depends on the family. I know in
Hmm.
my family, my mom always wants to keep everything exactly the same to like the dollar, and I constantly have to tell her, Mom,
Yeah, yeah.
help out my little brothers, because if they need help and you're there to help them and you can help them, great. Because if you don't, someday I'm going to have to.
Right, right, right.
So
And
please, does not have to be
so,
completely equal. I understand this, and that's my family dynamic. But I'm sure there's other
well,
ones where you feel left out, or because somebody got more and less, and I
right.
think that's more of a family dynamic. So you're gonna have to figure out what's most important to you. And my advice would be communicating it with
Yeah.
everybody so that everybody knows what's going on.
Well, and you know, from experience, when a parent passes away, all the siblings are 12 and 13 years old again anyway, you
Right?
know, and how they behave towards each other. So but
Yeah.
whatever you do, you know, it's all going to be, you can knock yourself out trying to be fair, and those sibling rivalries and everything are still going to be there regardless of how fair you were. So
Yeah.
just
Absolutely.
do what you think is right, I think, is a better
Yes.
way. Yeah.
Yep. The best you can do.
Yeah.
So some other things to consider. I always talk about it in terms of, what's most important to you. And a lot of times when
Hmm.
we're going through our process and we're talking to people about these things, we have this idea of a heart's core, which is essentially, what do you need to do to live a fulfilling life? And some of that might be supporting your kids. And one thing
Right.
that we
Yeah.
haven't talked
Yeah.
about that probably should have been on that list is college, right? How
Sure.
much are you going to
Yeah.
pay for a kid's college and at the cost of what to you?
Right.
And so, but if that's at your heart's core, where, the most important thing to you is making sure your kids are educated, that might be
Yeah.
different to you than
Yeah.
someone who maybe doesn't have that belief in college. And so when we're having conversations around things like affordability and should I do it, it really comes down to figuring out what's most important to you versus this concept of ought to, which is this
Right.
kind of been ingrained in me. I really should do this, but I don't know that that's necessarily
Yeah.
super important to me. And when you can break those things down and start thinking about those, I think that really helps when it comes to making these types of decisions.
Yep. Yep. Um, Backing up a little bit, sometimes we talk to parents about lending money to their kids instead of giving money to their kids, and
Yes.
which I think is fine. But I always point out, because talk about the awkward Thanksgiving dinner conversations. If you're going to make it a loan, you put it in writing with actual terms that you both sign. And I'm not saying you need to go to a lawyer and get it drawn up, but if you expect that money to be paid back at a percentage amount, or with a particular interest rate, or even without interest, but just paid back in 10 years, you need to put that down on paper that Junior's going to be making payments to me. Otherwise, it's a gift, and you need to mentally treat it as a gift, even if they tell you they're going to pay you back.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that's something that a lot of times, especially with family, we kind of get around because we don't feel comfortable with it. And
Right.
it's not to say that if you give your child a loan that you can't forgive it and say,
Joe,
hey,
absolutely. Yeah.
but if you don't put it down as a loan, like you said, it's technically a gift. And so think
Yeah.
about those things and think about how you want to
Yeah.
be repaid and what that looks like. And great example is Warren Buffett loaned his own kid a bunch of money for a farm. I mean, this is a billionaire who
Yeah.
made his own son loaned him money to get
Yes.
a farm. So, just because you have a bunch of money doesn't necessarily mean that you should be giving it away. I don't know
Right.
if he ended up paying it back or getting it forgiven, but I always found that interesting that a billionaire would loan his own kid money.
That is so Warren Buffett.
Yeah, it really is.
Which he's a treasure, but yeah, and that just gets down. His values were not having anything to do with his money and his ability. It had to do with what he wanted to teach his kids.
Right.
And so that there you got the two sides of that, whether you value helping them and giving them as much as you can, or you value teaching them what you see as life lessons. And those things don't have to be diametrically opposed.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You can find those middle grounds between the two. Yeah, so things that come to mind too is if you think things like this are on the horizon, those should be built into contingency funds and into plans as soon as possible. And one thing I always tell clients is, if you just have an inkling that you might need some money at some point in the near future, I want to be your first call so that we can make sure that we're ready for it. I don't want it to be, hey, I need a check for, $30,000 on Tuesday. Let me know, a month before that if you can, or longer. The longer the better. I'm not stating that very well, but if you think it's a possibility, we should be talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think what we've illustrated in this conversation is it's a conversation about what you value and what you want to teach your kids. And I know that we try very hard to not judge people for the decisions that they make on the things that are important to them. And I know that there are financial planners and advisors out there that will put their own stamp on, what they think is important and tell you to do things or not to do things based on what they believe and not necessarily what's truly important to you. So just be careful about that when you're thinking about these things and you're thinking about whether or not you should or shouldn't do something, whether or not you can or can't afford it. Stick to your guns and what's most important to you and what you want to ultimately do for your kids in life.
Yeah, and don't be we've all got families. Every family has its own idiosyncrasies, right?
Absolutely.
So don't be afraid to talk to an objective outsider who can maybe help give that perspective, and if nothing else, help identify the risks and the best ways to do things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think this is one of the tough conversations that are had, but having a good, independent advisor that can help you talk through not only the financial aspects, but some of the other things, I think makes a ton of sense. And it's not uncommon to have, another great example would be if you have a kid that you're trying to help, put some strings on it, like, hey, you need to meet with this financial advisor and get yourself set up.
Yep.
We've had those conversations with client kids.
Yes.
And I think that's another thing that you can do to say there's some strings attached to this in terms of what you need to be able to do to get yourself on track.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Well, this is one of those conversations that never really ends. There's always more to be said, I think. But, if at the bottom line is just, be open, have communication, and get some help if you need it.
Absolutely. And we're definitely here to help. So if you have situations like this, feel free to reach out, shoot us an email, give us a call, and we'd love to sit down and talk with you about some of those things.
All right, Nick, have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.